This is your Day X World War III update. I've not made a daily report since my apoplectic rant about the government expropriating our firearms in order to send them off to Ukraine to start a nuclear war with the Russians. The reason for that is not because I've been demoralized, and if you are, you should know that according to the experts I've spoken to, people exceptionally knowledgeable about the topic, probably the most knowledgeable of the topic in the country, they are saying that there is a very high likelihood that this is going to either be repealed or that it is just not a viable, practical solution, and it likely won't even be enforced anyways. But they're saying that there's a very good chance this will be repealed in October of 2025 when the Conservatives assume control of the government, barring no crazy scandals and controversies that might prevent them from doing so. And you know me, I'm quite cynical. I think that all teams play for the same side, so I'm not holding my breath on that, but there is hope. Okay, there is definitely hope. The reason why I've not done a video is because I've been trying to wrap my head around this Syrian situation. And unless you have a PhD dissertation in the history of Syria, it's very unlikely that you're going to be able to truly, through and through, understand the sectarian clusterfuck currently happening in that country. So I think it's best to approach it from a more simplistic point of view, in that, are we closer or further away from SHTF? And what are the factors that are contributing to us either being closer or further away to SHTF? In terms of my notes, I have 10 pages of exceptionally condensed bullet points that is probably a synopsis of at least 1,000 pages of articles and news reports and various interviews over the last few days. But really, this is just white noise at this point in time. So I'm going to try to just take the bird's eye view and break it down for you. And, you know, if I can't speculate in these videos, then it's not interesting to me. I don't feel as though I'm contributing something unique. In fact, you know, if all you want is an aggregate of all the bad news, you can just get some AI to do that for you nowadays. It's not that hard. But if you genuinely want to take a step back and think about these things and try to get a handle, think about where we're going, and this is the problem with Syria and the problem with any situation when you're trying to prognosticate, is that if you can't get a sense of what is going on, if you don't know what's going on in the present, there's no way in hell that you are going to be able to predict the future, or to, of course, we always deal in probabilities here, but to be able to infer what might happen in the future. Now, essentially what's happening in Syria is, yes, it's a CIA, Mossad, MI6, proxy, Al-Qaeda, ISIS adjacent group, which is now in control. Okay, they've essentially replaced a dictator with a terrorist. You know, I mean, imagine this was September of 2001 and this happened. I mean, the American military would be in there in a hot minute. I mean, effectively, we are tacitly endorsing this and cheering it on and still referring to them as rebels. Some people have now come around, and you're starting to see more mainstream media start to question Al-Qaeda being in control. Of course, this is all part of the plan, because Israel could not defeat Syria with its regimented military when it was backed by Russia and Iran. What it could beat and what it will defeat is Al-Qaeda in Syria. So they've effectively allowed the Turks and Al-Qaeda to move into position into this region. And this was all done sequentially with the ceasefire in Hezbollah. Basically, they broker a ceasefire so that they can take over Syria, cut off the supply lines to Hezbollah, and then as soon as they got that locked down, because right now Israeli tanks are advancing towards Damascus as I make this video, they're going to basically cut off Hezbollah from Iranian weapons, and then they're going to go back to the war with Hezbollah. Okay, that's what's going to happen. Now, the broader question, though, is this bringing us closer or further to SHTF? On the one hand, the destruction or decimation is not the right word. I don't know if there's a word for decimation, but when you're talking about destroying a capacity by 90%, because effectively the tentacles of Iran, which is the axis of resistance, be it Hamas, groups within the West Bank, Hezbollah, Syria, have effectively been destroyed, okay? And so what that means then is that Israel's necessity to utilize the Samson option is greatly diminished. So Israel's likelihood of using nuclear weapons is diminished so long as Iran does not execute Operation True Promise 3, which is what they have been promising to execute in response to Israel's attack on their country. Of course, we still don't know the details, whether that was substantial at all. Nonetheless, Iran has claimed that they're going to do this counterattack. Now, the things that could elicit Israel using nuclear weapons could be a nuclear Iran. The likelihood of a nuclear Iran has most certainly increased because, of course, their proxy tentacles have effectively been neutered. Hezbollah is likely next, barring some shift on what goes on in Syria. It's much easier for the Israelis to operate, and the MI6 and, the CIA and Turkey to operate inside Syria without the Russians and Iranians present, which they've effectively been chased out of there. And so this means that, they're cheering on this rebel thing now. They're going to let that play out for a few weeks. Then all of a sudden you're going to start hearing about how bad the new group who is in charge is, and they're going to be vilified, and then that is going to be grounds, and they're going to make you forget all about how they were cheerleading the downfall of Assad, and of course they're going to attempt to install their own puppet government of sorts, or they're just going to annex the entire region. Turkey's going to annex. It's going to be a balkanized clusterfuck, right? So effectively, the likelihood of Israel using a nuclear weapon is decreased so long as Iran doesn't go nuclear. Now, if Iran can go nuclear in a way that's fast and demonstrable, in the sense that they have enough nukes to have deterrence, because right now Iran needs deterrence. Hezbollah will be destroyed in short order unless Iran can establish some kind of deterrence. If they can't do that, then Israel is likely going to continue to go all the way. Why wouldn't they? This is in the nature of the West, okay? We push until somebody pushes back. Now, had the entire axis of resistance acted in coordination on October 7th, this would be a different story, and it's very likely that Israel would have already had to utilize a Samson option because Iran had the numbers, they had the proxy groups. If Hezbollah went full bore on Israel and Yemen and all of the Iraqi militias and Syria, it would have been over. It would have been finished. It would have been nuclear, though, and that's the problem, right? Israel would have used nukes. Now, the real question is what the hell is going on in Russia and Ukraine? Because it has been incredibly quiet. You could hear a pin drop. Besides the ongoing conflict in the Donbass, in which I think the Russians have now acquired 700 square kilometers of territory within the past month, which is the most since the beginning of the war. Asides that, we're not hearing a whole lot. And I believe the reason is, I stand by my prediction, that the reason for this is that both sides are amassing an arsenal, okay? I think the Ukrainians are stockpiling missiles. They are currently in the process of building these long-range, these new missile drones, which have some features of both drones and missiles, kind of the best of both worlds. And they have a range of 700 kilometers, which is well beyond Moscow. Now, I believe that they are accumulating these in order to do a major attack. I don't know when that's going to happen, but we got about 40 days until Trump takes office. And in light of the scenes coming out of the summit with Macron and Zelensky and Trump, it seems as though Trump is certainly more on board with Project Ukraine than most people initially expected. Of course, I've been telling you for the longest time that it's not going to make a difference. There's not going to be any retrenchment in spending in Ukraine. And in fact, I think you're going to see a ramping up. Remember the amount of money they spent in Afghanistan, and understand that Ukraine is far more important than Afghanistan geopolitically speaking. And they've barely gotten started with respect to the amount of resources that they could pour into that particular conflict zone. Arguably, with what was provided to the Afghanis and the Taliban, Ukraine probably could have done some real damage by this point on Russia, which of course they have, but not to the extent that many think they could have. So what has happened now is that Russia has effectively lost their foothold in the Middle East, and quite possibly is about to be expunged from their naval bases and their military bases, effectively cutting them off from their Mediterranean port. So this is of great importance because, of course, it weakens Russia's sphere of influence. It increases the likelihood that they're going to have to resort to the nuclear option in Ukraine. So on that front, the likelihood of Russia utilizing a nuke, presuming that Ukraine continues with its provocations, is much, much higher. Much, much higher. Because in Syria, Russia had leverage. And if it is true that Turkey has effectively backstabbed Russia, then there is a very good chance that Russia, especially if there's some disputes over the Bosphorus Strait, which is where Russia can pass its ships through, if Turkey does not allow that, then there could be some real problems. And you start to realize real quick why there's U.S. nuclear weapons inside Turkey, despite all of the tough talk, which is all just bullshit from President Erdogan. So, on the whole, it's difficult to say if we are closer or further away from SHTF. Certainly on the Russian front, presuming that this big attack happens, we absolutely are closer. Okay, I mean, look, we are always closer day after day. So long as peace is not declared, we're always moving towards that, despite whatever sort of handle Israel might have on the situation. Generally speaking, what you want is one side to win. To avoid a nuclear conflict, you want one side to win. It really doesn't matter which side wins. Assuming that one side wins, then nukes don't have to be used. What you don't want is a situation where there's the kind of stalemate that gets existential. And you have a situation where both sides are just hanging on, and eventually they get down to their non-conventional weapons, and that's when things inevitably go nuclear. Now, it still could go that way in Israel. I think that if you look at this situation, I mean, it could be a Shakespearean tragedy, or it could be a hero's journey, with respect to the axis of resistance, because the tendency is for most empires to overstretch their boundaries. And once they do that, they tend to break off more than they can chew. And yeah, they're colonizing, they're crusading, they're taking more territory and more territory, but they're also acquiring a lot of enemies along the way and perhaps breaking off more than they can chew. So with Israel's new spoils, be they in the Gaza Strip, in southern Lebanon, in the Golan Heights, in possibly deeper into Syria and beyond, they might be under the impression that they got this in the bag, and Netanyahu's got he's grinning from ear to ear. I mean, he's got the decapitation strike, the pager thing. Hamas is relatively in check. The West Bank has been, for the most part, mollified. You have of course, Hezbollah, the clock is ticking. Syria is done. So it's just a matter of dealing with Iran at this point. So they're laughing right now, but, this could be the hero's darkest hour from the axis of resistance point of view. And what tends to happen in a situation like this is when it's make or break for a country. So they break out the big guns. They break out the 0 days. They perhaps commit to utilizing some of their non-conventional weapons, not necessarily nuclear, but they're, how would you say, utilizing those plays that are kind of the Hail Mary plays. And those, of course, have the potential to escalate things severely, all right? So what we could be looking at is a massive attack from Iran against Israel, which would potentially compel Israel to respond in a way that either forced Iran to acquire nuclear weapons or triggered an actual war between Iran and Israel. It could potentially force Russia to get involved. It's an incredibly complicated situation. Now, this is just the war front, all right? We got diseases emerging in the Congo. Apparently, I've been following this very closely, and just to kind of change gears a little bit, this mystery epidemic, they're already 5 or 6 days in from acquiring samples of this particular virus. And according to the experts, this is more than enough time. They could have determined whether or not this was the flu or some other form of common virus or bacterial infection within the first, few days. The fact that they haven't released that information yet is somewhat concerning. There's been several countries, particularly Eastern countries, Thailand and Japan, to name a few, who've issued travel advisories to the Democratic Republic of Congo. Right now, I think there's been all kinds of conflicting estimates with respect to how many people have died, but it's somewhere between 50 to 200 people who've died, with about 500 known cases. Now, I've heard lower estimates of a 7% fatality rate all the way up to like a 50% fatality rate. There's not a lot of information. What we do know is that it's flu-like symptoms and it's affecting children. Okay, so that's not children, but teenagers. So typically, teenagers, good immune systems. I think the Spanish flu back in 1914 to 18, it was, at least initially, it was killing a lot of younger people. So this is contrary to what we see with, COVID, where it takes out old people, the boomer remover. This is probably going to be the zoomer remover. Now, this is just one of those crazy black swans that could upend everything, all right? And so, barring some event like that, some black swan, crash of the American financial system, civil unrest, which is still in the cards, because, of course, if the U.S. suffers some economic catastrophe, that's going to affect their vassal state, Israel's ability to continue to prosecute these wars in the only way they know how, which is just incessant bombardment of mostly civilian populations. I mean, is it any surprise that Israel went in there immediately, within 5 minutes, the Americans and the Israelis, and they all had pre-positioned assets. They had all the bombs ready to go. Is it any surprise they declare a ceasefire? All of a sudden, Aleppo falls within a day, and they go in there and they bomb the shit out of the place? Now, the question is, if they could have done that at any time, if this HTS group could have went in there at any time, why didn't they go in there before? And this is where some people think that, maybe Assad, his wife is known to have some MI6 connections. Maybe there was a bit of skullduggery there and triangulation amongst, the various interests, and perhaps Assad had a deal and maybe the Russians had a deal with Assad and Iran, and it's enough to make your head spin. Don't even bother to try to figure it out. All we know for now is that the Russians appear to be kicked out of Syria, and that is not good for the stability of the region, believe it or not, because just to have that balance of power, okay? It's not that it's not good for the region, it's just from the Russians' point of view, it's bad for them, and it limits their options. Now, especially, of course, if they're able to build this pipeline through Syria, which is what they want. They want to build an oil and gas pipeline through there to supply Europe, which would effectively cut off the Russians from Europe, even though I would venture to say that the Russians probably don't need Europe to have a viable oil and gas economy. I think they could do just fine selling all of their oil and gas to the east. But, of course, there's a lot of conflicting interests here. And again, skullduggery is afoot everywhere because the Russians have a vested interest in the Iranians fighting a war, ensnaring the Americans, occupying them, redirecting attention away from Ukraine. So both the Iranians and the Russians have a vested interest in the other ones, taking most of the heat. But the Russians, I think, want Iran to engage in a war. They want them to feel empowered enough to do so, but they don't want to have that kind of responsibility that when Iran does enter the war, that they are now going to be a part of that, in the sense that they don't want to make Iran a part of their nuclear umbrella, right? Because, you want to have a strategic partnership, but you want to be very clear as to what that means. That doesn't mean that we're going to nuke people on your behalf. It means that we're going to maybe perhaps help your military industry in certain respects, provide you with certain types of technology, maybe even assist you on your own nuclear program, but not like the agreement they have with North Korea. Because North Korea is different in that they, of course, have China there as well to kind of backstop that a little bit. But I was talking about the pandemic and then I just suddenly went back into geopolitics. I'm sorry, guys. It's been a long 4 days that I've been just amassing information. Of course, we have the H5N1 virus also breaking out in the United States. Now, they claim that as Assad is in Moscow, he's going to go back to his practice of, what is it again? Not ophthalmology. Is that what it is? Ophthalmology? I can't remember what it is, but he's going to go back to being a doctor. Anyways, people are concerned that Iran has now launched a heavy payload into orbit. For them, a heavy payload, 300 kilograms. Nothing like Starship or anything like that, but nonetheless enough to potentially put some sort of warhead weaponization of space. Of course, I highly doubt they're at that level yet. They first have to have non-conventional weapons on their IRGMs, or their IRBMs, I should say. What else do we got to talk about here? Denmark has delivered more F-16s to Ukraine. Russia's deploying hypersonic Orezhnik missiles in Belarus, which I don't really understand why. I don't really understand why you would be putting all this stuff in Belarus unless you were planning on using them as a patsy of sorts, as being a fall guy. Because, I mean, these things have sufficient range that there's no need to put them in Belarus, right? There is absolutely no need whatsoever. You already have tactical nukes there. Why would you be putting these in Belarus, aside really reducing the time that it takes for one of these missiles to hit certain targets? Of course, they have Kaliningrad, which is even more west than Belarus. So again, it doesn't really make a lot of sense. Seems purely political driven, perhaps to give Lukashenko a false sense of confidence. Washington has conveyed its readiness to equip and train new Ukrainian recruits if Mobilization age is lowered to 18. We have no moral propriety whatsoever. I mean, not only are we now cheering Al-Qaeda having deposed what some people view as the legitimate leader, one is the only leader who could have in some way brought secularism to the region. We're now saying that we're not going to give you any more guns and money unless you send your 18-year-olds to die. Okay, it's absolutely crazy. The U.S. is allocating $50 billion from frozen Russian assets to Ukraine, which is part of the reason why gold is on the rise again. And a lot of antimony stocks in the United States are rising as a result of the precious metals ban with China. So I'm telling you, 2025, oh boy, it's going to be crazy. It is going to be wild. Absolutely wild. NATO is shifting its strategy, exploring ceasefire negotiations and peacekeeping zones. Russia is never going to go for NATO peacekeepers unless it's well on the other side of the Dnieper River and Ukraine is balkanized and Russia gets the lion's share. It's just not going to happen. So that's never going to fly. And of course, Trump has to do something or else he looks weak. Germany is considering now, their opposition party is advocating for the Taurus missiles to be delivered to Ukraine. Of course, you're probably familiar with the Romanian situation. They are claiming that TikTok has influenced the election, and it's brought about people voting in favor of a pro-Russian candidate. I'm quite skeptical of this because even if there was a pro-Russian candidate, especially at this point, seeing the collapse of Syria, I'm pretty sure you could take whoever into a back room and say, hey, you want those F-35s we promised you? You ain't going to get them unless you shut the fuck up, right? That's what they're going to say. Same thing that happened in Poland. So all these guys, Meloni and all of them who come out guns blazing and, claim to be against the Transatlantians Alliance, the Soros crowd or whatever, they all eventually capitulate. So, it is what it is. Taiwan is raising its military alert to high as China deploys 90 naval vessels. I believe there was a American admiral today who said something to the effect, what did he say? It was something about, it was something about how they're getting ready to go to war with China and they think they can win a war with China. Okay? So anyways, that's coming down the pike. They're saying 2027. I guess we'll see. Beijing establishes 7 zones of reserve airspace around Taiwan, intensifying provocations. Taiwan has launched emergency combat readiness exercises, warning Beijing's unilateral and irrational provocative actions. Warning against those actions. Chinese Communist Party reiterates claims of Taiwan as a part of China, threatening forceful unification if necessary. And there were nearly 90 vessels. I think I already talked about that. Talked about the pandemic threats. Google has unveiled a quantum computing chip, which they're claiming they can do, get a load of this, exponential error reduction and completing computations in 5 minutes that would take classical supercomputers 10 septillion years. So the implications is that if this is for real, some people think it's grossly exaggerated, and they're just sort of extrapolating what this has done in a very controlled circumstance that is not necessarily expandable yet. If it's true, then that means they can mine all the remaining Bitcoin because they have the processing power to solve all the equations and mine the remaining 1 million Bitcoin, which would effectively be worth around $140 billion, presuming that Michael Saylor and BlackRock Strategy, who are the largest holders of Bitcoin, presuming that they can keep it together and keep the ship from sinking, it would be worth $140 billion. For all we know, by that time, who knows, maybe it's worth $1. Nonetheless, if it's true that they can crack that code and this is a major milestone for quantum computing, then yeah, that could change everything. I mean, you pair that with AI and, I don't even want to think about what the implications are with respect to that. Russia's Cosmos 2553 satellite raises alarms with potential weaponization, risking space treaty violations. So, of course, there are concerns that Russia is weaponizing space, and Russia has concerns, rightly so, that we are weaponizing space. We, after all, are building one of the biggest rockets with the largest payload that could easily deploy hundreds of nuclear weapons into space with relative ease if we so choose. So the Pentagon is currently investigating that. China is resuming gold purchases after a 6-month pause, increasing holdings to 72.96 million ounces from 72.8 million ounces. Renewed bullion buying alongside lower global interest rates may revive a bullish trend in gold prices. I mean, gold is still $2,700. I mean, that is, that is just crazy that it's that. Desertification, 2024, hottest year on record. No surprise there. I think we're well past the 1.5 degrees C situation that was expected to show, catastrophic effects on the climate. Over the past 30 years, the landmass 30% larger than India has turned into dry lands, leaving 40% of the planet too arid to sustain agriculture. It is what it is. Now, I'll leave you on this note. Baba Vanga, the Nostradamus of the Balkans. She was the blind lady. Eyes were sealed shut. Couldn't see anything. Made some very reliable predictions, okay? Of course, with any psychic predictions that presumes predestination, that doesn't say much for free will. So it makes you wonder, we have no choice in the matter. But anyways, let's just say that she's right. Here's what she predicted: that the fall of Syria would spark a catastrophic global conflict. Her prophecy was that when Syria falls, there will be a great war between the West and the East. In the spring, a conflict will break out in the East that will lead to World War III. What do we mean by World War III? Aren't we already in it? I would say so. They're talking about the nuclear aspect. So that's essentially your Day X World War III update in a nutshell. I will see you tomorrow. Please go check out some of our other actual prepping videos